I am Dana Soar. I'm a member of the steering committee of the Housing Affordability Coalition of Howard County. Tell you more about that in a moment. We have a few other panelists with us this evening who will cover their own content, and we'll get to them momentarily. All right, so just a couple of words about the Housing Affordability Coalition in Howard County. It was formed in 2018 with a primary focus to bring more affordable housing to our community. And we do that by monitoring legislation, trends, best practices. We educate and advise. Tonight is an example of some of the education that we do in the community. Very importantly, we help to organize our members and other people in the community for action, to advocate for policies and regulations that promote more affordable housing in the community. We have over 40 organizational members and nearly 1,000 individual members and allies. Tonight, there are two areas that we're going to focus on. First, we'll hear about some local updates in Howard County, and then we're fortunate to have a couple of panelists with us who will address some very critical housing legislation that is under consideration in the General Assembly in Annapolis. And as we're going through that content, I thought it would be useful to provide a bit of a mental model to help to organize what you're going to see tonight. And the title of this slide is chosen from a very compelling and noteworthy book that I would recommend it to everyone, The Affordable City by Shane Phillips, who is working out at UCLA on housing matters. The book covers strategies that will put housing within reach, and Shane talks about a three-legged stool in terms of the policies that are required to bring more affordable housing online into the market. Supply, meaning policies that promote additional housing production, including affordable housing, and examples would be upzoning or rezoning for more density, including missing middle housing and other policies. Stability is focused on things like renter protections, rental assistance during times of crisis, and subsidy covers financial and other types of strategies to promote and incentivize the production of affordable housing. So you'll learn tonight about some things that are happening in Howard County and in Annapolis that fit various legs of the stool here in this mental model. What Mr. Phillips recommends, though, is that we need to be working on all three legs of the stool simultaneously. If we only have one or two, the stool collapses. So with that in mind, let me turn things over to Jackie Eng, who is one of the co-founders of the Housing Affordability Coalition and also the coordinator of that coalition. Take it away, Jackie.
Thanks, Dana. And thanks to every one of you who for your presence this evening. Before we get into the main event of what's happening in Annapolis, I'm going to take 10 minutes for an update on what's happening locally, which generally falls within the categories of preservation, new affordable units, and implementing the general plan. So let me start with preservation. Ranley Court and Waverly Winds are numbers 2 and 3 of 5 Enterprise Community Developments Columbia projects. The nonprofit affordability housing developer is tearing down 50-year-old dilapidated low-income apartment buildings and replacing them with quality housing that will almost double the number of apartments, including an increase in affordable units ranging from 30 to 80% of area median income, and accessible units for people with disabilities. The addition of market rate units will result in a more diverse, mixed income community. In the area of new affordable units, there we go. Since 2016, seems forever ago, the housing advocacy community has been waiting for the Artist Flats project to get off the ground. This is project 1 of 5 to which Howard County government in partnership with the Howard County Housing Commission and the Columbia Downtown Housing Corporation, committed to build almost 500 units of affordable housing that was to be built in conjunction with other public service projects. A new cultural center, a new central library, a new Banneker fire station, and a transit center. The countless delays in starting the cultural center Artist Flats project resulted in spiraling costs, which in turn resulted in more delays while significant additional financing could be secured. But this spring, we'll see shovels actually put into the ground. They will have to wait until the cultural center is completed before the 174 housing units, of which 87 will be affordable, can be built atop the center. But at long last, Artist Flats is moving forward. In January, the county council approved the contractor and proposal for the Long Reach Village Urban Renewal Center. According to the proposal, the 19-acre destination Long Reach site will have 330 rental units atop retail shops, and they will include mixed-use, multi-generational, affordable, and senior market rate apartments. There also will be 42 for-sale townhouses. The first phase, to be completed in 2029, will include 157 units.
Jackie, do we still have you?
After Long Reach, we have the Gateway. There we go. All right. After a year of working with consultants, the Gateway Advisory Task Force, and several opportunities for public input, the county's Department of Planning and Zoning is finishing up a Gateway Master Plan that will be presented this spring to the County Planning Board for review and recommendations, which will then in turn be forwarded to the County Council for adoption. The 1,100-acre Gateway Center offers the best opportunity for a significant increase in workforce housing over the next 20 years. The plan predicts that 4,500 to 6,600 new apartments and 1,200 to 1,800 townhouses will be needed to support a projected 4,000 to 8,000 new jobs. An adopted Gateway Master Plan will provide a general vision, but it's only the first step in what will be a long and complex implementation process. While the coalition has been engaged in this process and absolutely is all in for planning for the future, we really don't look at Gateway as an answer to today's 9,000 housing unit gap for households earning 50% of AMI. Dana? And our final bucket, implementing the general plan. A comprehensive zoning initiative that codifies any zoning changes are necessary to fill a new general plan, vision, and targets, including housing goals, is mandated by county procedures and is traditionally undertaken as soon as the general plan is adopted. As it appears, however, the county will not initiate comp zoning until after the next election, so maybe not until 2027. In the absence of comp zoning, the coalition has been looking for ways to move general plan called for housing goals forward. Here are 3 ways that we're currently working on. The first is ensuring a clear affordable housing definition. The general plan called for convening an affordable housing work group. One of its primary tasks was to define for general plan clarity and consistency a definition of affordable housing. The work group's recommended definition focused on households with income ranging from 50 to 120% of area median income. Data, however, reflects that there is more needed for affordable housing units at or below 60% area median income, and the greatest need is below 40%. So the coalition has asked the work group to reconsider its definition to define affordable as 60% or less affordable AMI. The work group, we are pleased to say, is currently considering our request. Next thing we're doing. The general plan calls for 10% of all new affordable units to be accessible for people with disabilities as defined by building code standards. But it doesn't focus on which of the current different codes, some of which are outdated, should be used. So the coalition will be working with service providers and advocates for people with disabilities to develop a recommendation for a code standard that can be used for all new construction. On a parallel track is an effort by H-Friendly Howard to update universal design code standards for older adults, some of whom, of course, have disabilities. The coalition is working with H-Friendly leadership in the hope of bringing the complementary measures to the county in a joint effort. And finally, the general plan identifies over 20 activity centers as the greatest opportunity in the short term to create affordable housing. The coalition has a team exploring just how much opportunity these multi-owner, some partially and some fully developed, some with limited land and some with prospering or faltering businesses may offer. In the meantime, we're seeing developers seek zoning regulation amendments, ZRAs, that would introduce new businesses into these activity centers. In the hope of preserving activity center capacity to develop housing, the coalition has begun to oppose such incursions, such as two recent ones approved by the council that will now allow development of storage facilities in two identified activity centers, thereby limiting future capacity for housing development. So that's a really quick top-level run-through of what's keeping the coalition busy. Please reach out if you have questions, and don't be surprised if we reach out to you for your help. Your voices are so important. Dana?
Thank you, Jackie. And thank you. And as a coalition focused on Howard County, as Jackie said, we've got our plates full, but also we're very keen to see progress in Annapolis. Last year, Governor Moore, his housing package was the most significant in memory. And this year we're hoping for more progress. And so there are two key pieces of legislation that we want to focus on related to Annapolis this evening. We're very fortunate to have two panelists with us. First, we'll hear from Chuck Cook, who is the Chief Legislative Officer for Maryland's Department of Housing and Community Development. He's going to talk to us about housing for jobs. Take it away, Chuck.
Thank you, Dana. Appreciate it. Yep, there we go. Next slide there. So House Bill 503 and Senate Bill 430. I know I've talked to many of you who are on this webinar now about it, but our purpose, what we're trying to do, is reduce Maryland's housing shortage. And it's a little bit different. It's not exactly setting goals, but we're trying to identify gaps, housing gap, areas around the state where there is an imbalance between the number of jobs and the amount of housing. So we're going after a very specific issue here. It's the reason why it's called the Housing for Jobs Act. We're looking at how a lack of housing for jobs in the area is creating an negative economic pressure on the state of Maryland. So why is it needed? It's driving the costs through the roof around housing for young folks. We are getting constant requests for senior housing issues, senior affordable housing issues, and it's contributing to an ongoing economic stagnation and migration out of the state. But I will tell you this: one fact that really has stuck out of my mind from the beginning when we've been dealing with this bill is, if we had maintained the same level of housing production from the great financial crash of 2008, 2009 to today, we would not have a $3 billion structure. Okay, so let me say that one more time. Had we stayed at production the same level, one of the stools, by the way, of the three-legged stool that Dana showed at the beginning, we are 39% below where we were in 2008. And we maintained that level of production, the economic development that would have grown for us would have grown us out of this hole of $3 billion. That's how impactful housing is on economic development in the state of Maryland. Next slide. So let's talk about Maryland's housing shortage. First and foremost, we're looking at specific areas where we're running into that gap, where housing shortage is based on a desired ratio of 1.5 jobs per housing unit available. And what do I mean by that? All of the academic data that we have shows that when you have a housing ratio of greater than 1.5 jobs to each housing unit, so 1.5 to 1, when it's greater than that, you will suffer an economic downturn or negative economic pressure, and your housing affordability will go down precipitously. At 1.5 or below, we see economic growth, we see affordability rising, and the ability for more people to stay in their homes, and the ability to have less people doubled and tripled up, right? So in the Washington, D.C. region, which we define as Frederick, Montgomery, Prince George's for the purpose of this bill, we're looking at a gap, right, of 59,566 homes, which basically means that for that region, those three counties together regionally, to get to that golden ratio of 1.5 to 1, they would need to create another 60,000 homes. Next slide. And the Baltimore region, for that matter, from Carroll, Howard, Anne Arundel, all the way around the city in Baltimore County, would need to produce 89,000 more homes to reach that 1.5 to 1. So they are all in excess. Next slide. Nope, I'm sorry, total shortage, yes. 149,206 all together. And then let's dive into the numbers a little bit, see how we do this calculation. When we look around the entire state, the way the bill works is we have 6 regions. Right? Your standard regions that you just saw Baltimore, you saw the DC region, but of course there's Southern Maryland, there's Western Maryland, the Upper Eastern Shore, and the Lower Eastern Shore. Now, when we do the calculations regionally for all of these areas, only 2 regions have this imbalance between jobs and housing units, right? Specifically related to economic development. And I want to make one thing incredibly clear, is that we recognize that the housing crisis affects everything from Garrett to Somerset County. And we realize multiple issues are involved in creating the housing crisis that we're in right now. But this bill is going at one specific economic development reason, right? So this is not a panacea that's going to cover every reason why we have a housing crisis. This is directly pointed at where jobs and housing connect and where that imbalance is. So, for instance, in my home county, Wicomico, and the Lower Eastern Shore, Worcester, Wicomico, Somerset, there's a huge offset in housing and a housing crisis that's led primarily through vacation VRBO rentals, Airbnbs, through senior retirement. So we're not talking about people that necessarily are employed. So employment isn't the issue, but you're reaching an unaffordability issue for other reasons other than this imbalance. So we do recognize other reasons in parts of the state, but for the purposes of this bill and the problem we're trying to solve, these 9 counties, or these 8 counties and Baltimore City, really constitute where the biggest issue is. So in the Baltimore region, for instance, there are 1.9 million jobs. There are 1.179 million current housing units. That creates a ratio, simple division, 1.61 to 1. You are in a gap. If you needed to get to 1.5, you need to have 1.268 million. That means your gap is 89,000, as it looks on the last picture, right? So then we look at the individual jurisdictions. So where I live now, I don't live in Wycomico anymore. I live in Anne Arundel. So in Anne Arundel County, for instance, there are 20. They have 23% of all regional jobs in the Baltimore area. So we're going to allot to Anne Arundel County their gap of 23% of the total number of housing units. Gives you 20,392. That's 23% of 89,000. So we would say with this, Anne Arundel County has a gap of 20,000. Let me be clear. These are not targets, goals necessarily. These are identifiable gaps, and we will recalculate these annually. Okay, so they can change based on how many jobs are in the area or how many houses are in the area, and entire regions could come out of the gap or they could go into a gap, right? So this is a floating point number that will change over time to make sure that we're getting that balance correct and ensuring that we have that economic development in those large job centers that we need. And you'll see DC has a similar calculation of 1.6, with Montgomery County having 53% of the 59,000, creating 31,000 as their gap. Okay, so this is how we're doing the math. And those are the only two regions that are affected currently, right? So let's look at Maryland's housing shortage and the impacts it's having while we're doing it, right? So past 10 years, again, we're not producing enough housing. Naturally, one thing's going to happen when it comes to basic economics and supply and demand. Rents are up 36%, and the median home price is up a full or almost a full 50%. Here's my little multicolored map. We rank 43rd among states for housing affordability, right next to the most affordable state, West Virginia. But as I often say as a proud Marylander, who the hell wants to live in West Virginia? Be that as it may, even our other closest neighbors, Pennsylvania, Delaware, and Virginia, our closest one is still 6 steps down the ladder in Virginia. We're finding folks leaving our states, not leaving our state, in the state of Maryland, not necessarily to go to the Sun Belt states, right, or to the South, where you always hear that there's this great growth and job growth and people moving to. They're moving to our most immediate neighbors. Virginia and Pennsylvania are the largest recipients of outmigration that we have, right, number 25 and 37. So they want to stay close and they want to be able to work, but they can't afford to live in Maryland. So 1 in 3 Maryland families are cost burdened. 53% of renters, so half, a full greater than half of all of our renters, pay more than 30% of income, which is considered to be the number you shouldn't go over, right? Is 1/3 for on rent. Young families have declining opportunities to home ownership. Outmigration, where it says 40,000 young Marylanders left the state in 2022. I want to point one other thing out about the young Marylanders. In that same year and for several years prior, Marylanders between the ages of 17 and 34 have led outmigration by 65%. So we constantly hear, well, I'm going to leave Maryland because of the taxes. I'm going to leave because of whatever the argument happens to be. I'm going to leave because it's cold and I want to go someplace. Now, 17 to 34-year-olds are leaving Maryland because they can't afford to live here. They're leaving it at a ratio of 2 to 1 of every other group. Okay, and so this is a personal story for me. If you were there in the federal house the other night, I told this story. I have a 23-year-old son. He lives in Pittsburgh. He went to Pittsburgh Institute of Aeronautics. He's an aircraft mechanic now, and he works at Pittsburgh International Airport. Apparently, they have an international airport because I guess they fly to Canada. Be that as it may, they call themselves an international airport. We think that's cute. Live around BWI, and so he works there. He lives in a 2-bedroom apartment with his girlfriend. They pay $700 a month. Okay, they are paying $700 a month for a 2-bedroom apartment in Pittsburgh. I asked him when he's planning on moving back home now that he's graduated. He found himself to be gainfully employed up there. I asked him when is he coming back home. He says as soon as you can raise my salary by 3 times the amount, because it would cost me $2,100 to $2,200 to get to the state of Maryland. Right? So this is personal to me, and I want you to help me move my son back home to Maryland so he's not 5 hours away from me. And he is one of those 17 to 34-year-olds that's been driven out, right? So it's a personal issue for me and probably for some of you with kids in that same range. So economic performance. We've been stagnant since 2017. We've been buffeted by a whole lot of federal money, as a lot of people know. It's been floating us for a long time, with COVID being the icing on the cake that had a precipitous drop at the end when our ARPA money dried up, and now we see what we're dealing with the after effects of that. Completely stagnant since 2017. For someone who said that we were constantly open for business, turns out we weren't. And now we're suffering the economic impacts of actually not doing anything for 8 straight years. We only have 33 workers available for every 100 jobs. Many businesses can't grow or even operate at full capacity. And you can put the graph on the screen. This is probably the most shocking piece. While Virginia was at 11.2%, and Pennsylvania is at 6.6%. The United States on a whole was at 13.9%. Maryland grew at an anemic 1.6 from 2016 to 2023, when we were quote unquote open for business. That economic growth was less than 2%, right? Employment growth was only 1%. Personal income per capita, real wages average growth. We trailed every other state around us and trailed the United States by a factor of 10 almost, right? So this is a problem, and if we don't get to the root of this with creating more housing, we're not going to be able to solve this problem. How does it address the crisis? Well, I covered the standard process to measure housing gaps, right? The ratio of jobs to housing units in the region, and then the local jurisdiction's share of jobs. Step 2. So if you're in a gap, if you're in that Baltimore region or you're in that DC region, and you are currently experiencing a gap and you're a local government, you will have an obligation while you're in a gap to approve new housing units unless there is a reason that outweighs the need for housing, right? And it's actually worded that way. I like this, unless there's a valid reason for denial, but unless there's a reason that outweighs the need for housing. We word it like that very specifically to say there are good needs to deny things, but does it outweigh the community's need for housing right now? So examples of those are insufficient capacity of schools, water, sewer. We do have school capacity measures in there because we know that's a big issue that we need to make sure we solve. And we have, of course, water and sewer. We have health and safety of the residents. We don't want you building on protected land, critical areas. So we have environmental protections in there, incompatibility with zoning, specific adverse impacts. And more than anything else, I think the best way to describe this piece is to say, we just want the rules to be followed on paper. Okay. So what I mean by that is, if you come in, there's actually what's called an early vesting part of this. You come in as a builder and you say, hey, listen, I noticed that your comprehensive plan says this piece of land is zoned R100, which means you can build 100 residential units per acre. I have a plan that fits all of the requirements here, and I put in my application, and they say, okay, looks good so far, let's go. In 18 months' time, you don't get to come back and say, well, I've thought about it again, and I really want to kill your project, and I want to stop it, right? This says there needs to be some predictability so that builder can walk in the door and say, this is what you have zoned, this is what you've decided as the leaders. And so I'd like to put in a project that fits this bill, these objective standards, and I'd like to proceed with it with some level of predictability that when I start investing money in this, I'm not going to turn around later on and have it killed because someone's decided that they don't like the project anymore, even though they said yes, right? So that's really the best way to think about this is if you're in a gap, we're just asking you to follow the rules in the paper and that there's some predictability to the process. And where that matters more than anything else is for affordable housing developers, small nonprofit affordable housing developers that do not have tremendous amounts of capital to put out there and wait to see if there's a mercurial process that eventually kills the project, and then whatever money they've outlaid, they're out of pocket, right? So especially when it comes to our developers, the nonprofit developers that work with us on affordable housing, this is an incredibly important piece to provide that predictability. And then once you have that, you'll be able to reduce the jurisdiction's gap on a one-to-one basis. So I build 300 units, then the gap for the entire region drops by 300 units, right? But we do give, because we are the affordable housing developing subsidy, the second leg of that stool, we subsidize all the affordable housing in the state of Maryland. We want to give incentives for local governments and local developers and builders to build affordable housing. So if you're building affordable, and I saw there's a great question here from Barry, what exactly is the price range of affordable housing? Our definition in the bill is locked in for 40 years, deed restricted, that property has to rent to someone earning 60% or less of area median income. And the rent has to be commensurate with that. So it has to be no more than 30% of that income. And that's how we define affordable housing for us. Now, that's 60% or less. So a lot of our affordable housing developers will build deeply affordable, which is 30% AMI, 40% AMI, that level too. But you'll get a 1.5 to 1 offset to remove units off of the gap if you build affordable. And the great thing is, a lot of the counties around the state of Maryland have MPDU requirements, right? So those are moderately priced dwelling units. So there's already a requirement for them to have a certain number of percentage affordable in every development, which means they automatically get this greater differential of 1.51 units to be removed. Also, if you're located within 3/4 of a mile of passenger rail, which you get that. So what does all this mean? Let's talk about benefits. There's one on here that, Dana, I didn't cover for you, but I'm going to make sure I say it at the end, which is improved economic competitiveness. That's why it's called the Housing for Jobs Act. That's what we want. New revenue. When I take a broken down mall and redevelop it into 350, 400 units, then I am getting new revenue for county governments to fund services. I'm getting new revenue for the state to fund services for our residents. And so it's incredibly important that those two are tied together, economic competitiveness and new revenue. Expanded purchasing power for households. Biggest drag on the economy right now, 53% of renters spending more than 30% of their money on rent. And think about that. Every single extra dollar they're spending on rent is one that they're not spending in our economy. It's a reason why we have a $3 billion deficit. It's a reason why our economic growth is 1.6%. Reduce traffic congestion. And there's one thing I'd also tie to this, and there's a reason why Sierra Club is coming in to support our bill, that we are trying to reduce miles traveled on the road, right? I want to get jobs close to where people live, right? Jobs, our CDA director, it's the Community Development Administration at DHCD, has a great line all the time, which is housing is where jobs sleep at night, right? Like if we need to service the residents of Maryland and say, look, you don't need to be on the road for 2.5 hours every day commuting from one place to another. We're coming in from York County down to be a teacher in Baltimore County. We're coming in from across the bridge in West Virginia to teach in Frederick. We want to get people to live where they work, be able to have those low commutes, take cars off the road, take miles driven off the road, and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So that would be the fifth piece I'd add in there, Dana. Just if we ever do this roadshow again, I'd throw that at the end. But those are the benefits. It's what we're trying to get at, and for the three-legged stool, we're trying to reach two things. Number one is supply, right? Number two is we're trying to incentivize affordable, because we are that subsidy, right? In the state of Maryland, we are that subsidy. Montgomery County, Howard County, Anne Arundel, they also have local funds that help subsidize too for their MPDUs. But writ large, we have the federal low-income housing tax credits that we build a lot of those. We do our gap funding. And so we are currently in a budget battle too to ensure that we have enough money to build more affordable. But those are the two things we're really trying to get on this one. And then I know that Cynthia is going to come in and she's going to talk a little bit about that stability piece. It's going to be on the next bill, which I was also proud to testify in favor of yesterday on behalf of the administration. Yeah. So with that being said, thank you, Dana. I'm done.
Thank you for being here, Chuck. Hang around for any questions that come, which we'll address at the end if we're not able to address them along the way. Appreciate all the work that you and your shop there at DHCD have been doing on this bill and others. So best of luck getting it over the finish line.
Thank you, Dan. And real quick, best of luck getting it over the finish line. We're going to get it over the finish line with everybody from AIM, PATH, and ACT, right? I mean, we know that. It's your advocacy. It is, Cynthia and I talk pretty regularly. We've become fast friends over this bill particularly. So that direct advocacy to those members on this relevant committees are going to be crucial in getting. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, thanks again, Chuck, and
Mhm.
great. Thank you for teeing up Cynthia's piece here. Back to that mental model of the three-legged stool. One of the legs is stability. How do we stabilize people in the housing that they're in today? Because it gets very difficult to rehouse people if they're displaced from housing. And so a second very important bill that's moving through the assembly as we speak is good cause eviction. I'm going to turn it over to Cynthia Marshall, who's the executive director of People Acting Together in Howard. That's PATH for short. Also the executive director of the Maryland Just Power Alliance. Welcome, Cynthia.
Thank you. It's great to be here with all of you tonight. Just very briefly, PATH does grassroots community organizing in Howard County and with its sister organizations across the state. We start by listening to people in their neighborhoods, communities, and homes, asking what gets in the way of you and your family thriving. And I've been organizing in Maryland since 2006. In 2006, housing was the #1 issue. Now I am hard pressed to meet any person who doesn't have a story from their own family, maybe not their own generation, but from an older generation or a younger generation that is connected to not having housing that is affordable for them to stay or return to or live in Maryland. So that this really is a profound housing crisis that we're in right now.
Well said.
So, as Chuck said, we are working on multiple fronts of this during the legislative session, including the Governor's Housing and Jobs Act. But I'm here tonight to talk about good cause eviction. And what you all may not know is that Maryland has the highest rate of eviction filings in the nation. And so this is an issue we worked with the governor's staff to pass really important legislation to protect tenants last year to hopefully reduce that, but there's still a long way to go. So good cause eviction requires landlords to have a justified reason for evicting someone. Because right now, landlord doesn't have to have any reason to evict someone as long as it's the end of their lease. And most renters, after they've been renting for a year, automatically move to month-to-month leases, which means their lease is up every single month. So many people who may have been living in communities as many as 15, 20, 25 years are on month-to-month leases and can be evicted at any time. Because the landlord can say, oh, I've just decided I don't want you living here anymore. I'm not going to renew your lease next month. That's 10 days from now. So this type of legislation has shown to decrease the number of eviction filings and could be really helpful in addressing the eviction crisis in our state.
Apologies if I went too quickly there.
It's okay,
Cynthia,
Dana.
if you need me to back up. Yep.
If I missed something, let me know.
No, you don't.
So there are 30,000 or more than 30,000 Marylanders experiencing homelessness each year. Over 5,000 Maryland families are displaced each year by eviction. Many of you may have read Matthew Desmond's book about eviction. Eviction is not something that just happens to you once. It is a long-lasting thing on your permanent record that makes it difficult to rent ever again. So, and the cost of being evicted and moving and having to again pay first, last, and deposit on an apartment also makes it very expensive. There were over 5,000 no-cause eviction filings in 2024. So again, these are evictions that happened where the landlord did not provide a cause for why they were evicting the person. And there has been a significant increase, a 62% increase in no-cause eviction filings compared to pre-COVID. And families of color are most vulnerable to eviction. So why good cause eviction? If the bill passes, so there's a lot of questions that have been raised. Many landlords are justifiably concerned. Does this mean I can never evict anyone? Absolutely not. You still have many reasons, justifiable reasons for evicting someone if they don't pay their rent, if they are causing problems in the community, if they are not following the terms of their lease agreement, if they are causing substantial damage, if they're not paying rent, if they are engaging in disorderly conduct or illegal activity, if they won't accept a new lease agreement, then you can evict someone. Landlords can absolutely evict people. You can also, if you're a landlord, if you want to make substantial repairs or renovations or need to remove the property from the rental market for more than a year, you may also evict someone. You can also make them move out. But what we've seen over and over in Maryland is that if you go to eviction court, you will see that people are being evicted over very small fines. What we see in our organizing is tenants who for good reason complain that there's toxic mold in their apartments, that there are problems with the washers and dryers, that their ceiling has caved in. If they complain too much, the landlord may just evict them. If tenants start to organize, one way to try to get the landlord to address the problems in the community, landlords will often evict people who they see as the renters who are the ringleaders. And this is a really important point. Because the housing market is so tight in Maryland, that means that if you are evicted, it is very hard to find a new apartment. And it also means if you're a landlord, there's not much risk to evicting someone because you're going to be able to get someone to move in very quickly. We heard a lot from folks during the hearing. Does good cause eviction discourage housing development? There is no evidence this is the case. And we are fighting for more development to happen. So we are trying to make it easier, less cumbersome for good housing development to happen at the same time. So good cause will not hurt housing development. And we are simultaneously trying to make it so that housing development can happen. Is there an exception for small landlords? Yes. Owners of 5 or fewer units are exempted. Do laws like this actually work? Yes. Good cause laws reduce eviction filings. 8 states and the District of Columbia and 23 localities passed similar laws. I would also like to point out that Maryland is one of only 5 states that does not allow local jurisdictions to pass these laws. So also to be clear, good cause eviction does not mean there's going to be good cause law. This is enabling legislation. All this does is then lets local jurisdictions, Howard County, Montgomery County, the city of Baltimore, any jurisdiction, then if they want good cause eviction, they have to pass it through their council and their executive. So this is just enabling legislation. So if you want to advocate for either of these bills, here's what we need to do in Howard County. For Housing for Jobs, Jen Terrassa, our delegate from District 13, is in a very important committee. You probably know this, but in the state legislature on the House side, a bill has to first go through a subcommittee and be approved by a subcommittee, and then go to a larger committee and be approved by the committee, and then go to the floor. If it passes the floor, then it goes to the other side. So this bill is being filed both on the Senate and the House side, but Jen Terrassa they're going to work on it on the House side first. And Jen Terrassa is on the subcommittee that is carefully looking at and deciding whether or not this bill should go to the committee. She has said that the bill should include an affordable housing component, and we are definitely pro-affordable housing, but this bill already includes significant incentives for affordable housing. And it's really important that this bill, the other thing is that local jurisdictions' requirements for affordable housing still stand with this bill. This bill does not in any way get rid of the affordable housing requirements that are already there. So in Howard County, except for Columbia, there are affordable housing requirements, and this bill would have to, any development that happened because of this bill would have to follow those requirements. So we are working to both call and email Delegate Terrassa on this bill. And so you can sign, if you go to this link here, which I think Dana is also going to put in the chat so you can actually link on it.
Yep, I will drop them into the link in just a moment. There,
Okay.
into the chat. Forgive me.
Okay.
There will be 4 links that'll come into the chat here in just
Perfect.
a
So
couple
if
minutes.
you want to, it would be great for Delegate Terrassa to hear from constituents. We're trying to have a few people call each day. So if you want to call and support this bill, you can call on this you can click on this action alert and sign up for a time. And again, this is the Housing for Jobs bill. When it comes to good cause eviction, it passed through the House last year in 2024, but did not pass through the Senate. And so it's going to the Senate first this time. And the House has said that they will pass it if the Senate does. So right now it is in the committee. And we do not have any senators from the Judicial Proceedings Committee in Howard County, but we are asking people to call or email their senator and let the leadership on the Senate side know, the Senate president and Senator Will Smith from District 20, who's the chair of the Judicial Proceedings Committee, let them know that tell your senator, go tell the Senate leadership that you're hearing from constituents that they should pass good cause. And PATH is going to be, throughout the session, is going to be working on these 2 bills. We are going to have up to the minute opportunities. We are going to provide opportunities for people to email at the most important times in support of good cause and in support of housing for jobs. So if you want to be on the list so that when there's a committee vote, when there's a hearing, when it's almost crossover date and it needs to get through the House or the Senate, if you want to receive alerts so that you can be most effective at calling your senator or delegate at the key times, you can sign up for our legislation alerts by joining the PATH mailing list. And what we will do is we'll provide you with a script. We will provide you with information on who to call. We will have you emailing and calling your senator and delegate directly, not just everyone haphazardly, but the ones for whom you are a constituent, which is who they listen to the most.
Perfect. Thank you, Cynthia. We're going to get to questions now, and I'm going to stop sharing so that we can process your questions that have come in. And again, I'll drop those links into the chat. We'll also be getting an email out tomorrow to everybody who registered or attended this evening, as well as all members of the Housing Affordability Coalition. So you'll have the links again in an email tomorrow. So don't worry if you're not able to grab them from the chat window this evening. Jackie, can you moderate the questions, please?
I would be happy to give it a shot. I'm going to start, Cynthia. We have a comment that I'd like you to respond to from one of our attendees. This is a bad bill. There's too much tenant protection. We need more protection when tenants do not pay rent. It takes 2 months to get somebody evicted. The bill would raise rents. Could you respond to that comment, please, relative to this good cause evictions bill?
You're muted, Cynthia.
So if a tenant is not paying rent, this will not change anything about how eviction proceedings happen. What this will do is for situations where the landlord decides that they don't like a tenant or doesn't want a tenant to live there anymore, or a tenant is raising concerns about unhealthy conditions, etc., this will not allow a landlord to evict them. And I think I would argue that since Maryland has the highest eviction filing rate in the country, that we are not one of the states where it is particularly hard to evict someone.
Thanks, Cynthia. I think this one is for Chuck. how frequently are housing units denied for reasons that wouldn't be allowed under the Housing for Jobs initiative?
All the time. Okay. We see housing projects that are completely arbitrarily shut down for reasons that make little to no sense when that was originally okay. So one thing we like to talk about is Lutherville Station in Baltimore County. I don't know if you guys have known about this particular project, but it is a dilapidated and decaying mall called Lutherville Station that is right on the light rail. So it is a TOD development that if we were to build would allow people to come in and out of the city easily and live in Lutherville and Lutherville Station. There was a project called, rightfully so, Lutherville Station that would have been a redevelopment of that place that the developer has been working for over a year and a half with the county government to get it where it needs to be. And there's a certain amount of councilmanic privilege that is given to the council members in Baltimore County that allow them to unilaterally upzone or downzone sites. And that's exactly what happened. This site was unilaterally downzoned through professional courtesy of the rest of the council to bring it down to single family level so that the original plans of a multifamily development, it could not be built. So that would be a direct violation of the objective measurements at the time of construction. Right? That is someone who comes in later on and says arbitrarily, I don't want to do this, so I'm just going to downzone the area, right? And that's just one of many examples we have around the state where a housing production project comes in. Oh, and by the way, that was an affordable housing project that would have had an affordability measurement on it too. So this is affecting housing all around the state where there is an arbitrary set of rules that are unspoken that allow them to change the rules midway. So that's just one example of many that I've got. It's actually a great question because members of the committee have been asking too. Well, if not for this, give me an example of something that would have gone forward. So you're thinking along the lines of the way a legislator's thinking about, which is that's the kind of stuff that they want to do.
Thank you, Chuck.
Thanks, Chuck. All right, we have another question, and this is probably both of you, but I'm gonna say Cynthia. Would there be any limit on how much change could happen on a new lease agreement? Could the landlord jack up the price by 50% so they can be compliant with the law, but essentially still evict someone for not accepting a new lease?
I believe so, but Chuck, I will check with you. Yep.
Yeah, so that was actually in the hearing yesterday in the Senate Judicial Proceedings hearing. That exact same question was asked: is that could they not have a de facto end by just jacking up the lease at the end? And yes, they could. I would say that that's something that's going to need to be worked out in committee to ensure that potential abuse doesn't happen. As currently drafted, that could be a de facto way to eliminate a lease.
Okay, so that's the last questions I'm seeing in the chat and the Q&A. Does anybody have anything that they want to throw in afterwards and now? If not, I'm just going to offer my sincere appreciation. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm going to go back to some questions that had to do with local. And one of them was, hold on. What housing is available in the Columbia area? And I responded that I'm happy to respond to that individually afterwards. And the question about 3 and 4 bedroom units. What's the price for affordable housing? Is there a price for affordable housing for 3 and 4 bedroom units? And I know that Dana, you might actually be able to answer this better than I.
Sure.
I don't know what those prices are now.
Yeah.
But it's an issue for sure.
Well, it's again, we would go back to the typically when we're talking about affordable housing, we're most focused on people earning 60% or below of area median income. And I know that data for Howard County, so I'll give you some examples. Area median right now it's about 130,000 for a family of four. It's going to go up in the middle of the year to about 145,000 for a family of four, but let's use the 130. So a family of four, 130, housing costs should take no more than or consume no more than 30% of that 130,000. If you're a two-person household, you're talking about your area median would be 65,000. So the home should be affordable to you on that $65,000 income. So the number slides depending on household size and depending on the locality where you live, because incomes are different across the state. But the thing to take away, if this is new for you, is that housing should cost, to be sustainable, it should cost no more than 30% of your family's gross income. That's before taxes, childcare, healthcare, food costs, transportation costs, all the other household necessities, 30% of gross. And as Chuck said, more than 50% of Maryland renters are over the 50% or overburdened, so they're spending more than 30%. In Howard County, we know that nearly 15,000 households are in that category, and more than half of them are spending more than 50%. 50 cents of every gross dollar of income goes to the landlord. Then you pay the tax man, then you pay childcare and so forth. So again, the 30% consumption of gross income is really what sets affordability.
And Dana,
to put
go
a
ahead,
to put
David.
Yeah,
to
please.
put a to put a fine point on Dana's point is that not only is our 53% of renters cost burden over 30, but nearly 30%, I think it's 29% of homeowners are cost burdened. I want to make one clarifying point though, because you went through the numbers kind of quick there, Dana, is that if it's 130,000 as AMI, you would take 60% of that, and you'd say, well, 60% of AMI, so I'd multiply that times 0.6, and you'd say that means you're creating for a family of four, you would be able to afford at that, I think,
In the 20, maybe
about
$2,000
$2,000 a month, right?
about $2,000 a month, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Is where you'd be locked in if you came in as a
Yeah.
So that's kind of that. Think of that as your floating point of that's a 60% AMI. So if we go deeply affordable, like a lot of our developers do, that can be as low as 30% of it, right? And then we have voucher holders on top of it. About we can stack those up.
It gets complex, but I think we can all agree housing costs too much for too many. We're in a crisis in Maryland, and it's great that there's legislation moving through in Annapolis. It's we have our work cut out for us right here in Howard County on the local initiatives that Jackie talked through, and there's much more to do beyond just what you heard tonight. So stay involved. Look for the email that will be coming out tomorrow with the links and a link to the recording of this session. And please get involved through advocacy with your local your representatives.